7:18 the Persian Gulf, 53 nautical miles northeast of Bahrain. The sun has been up for 31 minutes, and it is already a physical force, a white hammer driving down on the flat, glittering surface of the Gulf with an intensity that makes the air above the water ripple and distort. There is no wind. The sea is a mirror, and on that mirror, rising from the water on 4 steel legs driven into the Gulf floor, the Coral Pioneer offshore platform stood in the stillness of an early morning that had not yet become the crisis it was about to become. Coral Pioneer was not an oil rig in the conventional sense. She was a joint US-UAE strategic energy infrastructure platform, part of a bilateral energy security agreement signed 14 months earlier, whose operations combined commercial hydrocarbon extraction with a classified communications relay and maritime domain awareness function that made her, in the precise language of the 5th Fleet Intelligence Cell, a dual-use strategic asset. On her main deck, 41 personnel, 26 American civilians, engineers, technicians, and energy specialists contracted through a U.S. Department of Energy program, 8 U.S. Navy liaison personnel embedded with the platform's security and communications function, 7 UAE nationals who operated the platform's commercial extraction systems, 41 people on a steel platform in the middle of the Persian Gulf on a windless July morning. At 7:18 a.m., 6 IRGC fast patrol craft emerged from the heat haze to the north, running in a tactical line formation at 35 knots, their bows throwing white spray that caught the low morning sun. Behind them, moving more slowly, a larger IRGC naval vessel, a Hendajan-class patrol ship, was following at 15 knots. The fast patrol craft were armed. Their crews were in tactical equipment, and they were not slowing down. In Tehran, the operation had been authorized at the highest levels of the IRGC command structure 48 hours earlier. Its strategic logic was straightforward, and its operational design was compact. The Coral Pioneer's dual-use function, its communications relay role, supporting U.S. maritime domain awareness in the Gulf, had made it, in the IRGC's assessment, a legitimate military target. Its seizure would accomplish 3 objectives. First, eliminating a U.S. intelligence asset operating in what Tehran characterized as Iranian-claimed waters. Second, capturing 41 personnel, including 8 U.S. Navy liaison staff, whose status as captives would give Iran significant diplomatic leverage and domestic propaganda value. Third, demonstrating that U.S. and allied commercial energy infrastructure in the Gulf was vulnerable to IRGC interdiction, creating a deterrent effect against further joint US-UAE energy security arrangements. The IRGC commander, who had designed the operation, had assessed the response timeline at a minimum of 4 hours. The platform had no organic defensive capability. The nearest U.S. military installation was Naval Support Activity Bahrain, 53 miles away. In his operational model, the IRGC force would be aboard the platform, the personnel secured, and the fast patrol craft on their return transit toward Iranian waters before any U.S. military response could reach the area. By the time a response arrived, the personnel would be in Iran. The negotiation would have already begun. He had made 6 catastrophic mistakes. First mistake, the IRGC fast patrol craft had been acquired on radar 47 minutes before they reached the platform. The MQ-9 Reaper operating on a persistent surveillance circuit over the central Gulf. The same surveillance architecture that covered all major U.S. and allied assets in the region around the clock had been tracking the 6 fast patrol craft and the Hendajan-class vessel since they departed their base at Bandar Abbas at 5:51 a.m. The unusual formation, the direct heading toward Coral Pioneer, and the tactical spacing of the vessels had been flagged by the sensor operator at Al Udeid Air Base at 6:31 a.m., 47 minutes before the vessels reached the platform. The alert had gone simultaneously to 5th Fleet Headquarters in Bahrain, to the CAOC at Al Udeid, and to the platform's own security watch officer, who had received the warning at 6:34 a.m. and had immediately begun the platform's emergency procedures. 44 minutes of warning. The platform's U.S. Navy liaison personnel spent those 44 minutes doing 3 things. They barricaded the platform's communications and electronics spaces with the emergency hardening measures that had been pre-planned and rehearsed. They moved all civilian personnel to the platform's designated protected shelter, a reinforced interior compartment specifically constructed for exactly this scenario, rated to withstand small arms fire and capable of sustaining 41 people for 72 hours with its own air supply and communications equipment. And they transmitted a comprehensive emergency position report, platform status assessment, and personnel accounting to 5th Fleet via the platform's encrypted satellite communications link. A transmission that told 5th Fleet everything it needed to know about who was on the platform, what condition they were in, and what the IRGC force looked like as it approached. 5th Fleet had those 44 minutes too. They used them. Second mistake. The MH-60R Seahawk helicopters from USS Paul Hamilton were already airborne before the IRGC craft reached the platform. USS Paul Hamilton, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer on patrol in the Central Gulf, had received the alert at 6:33 a.m. and had immediately launched her 2 organic MH-60R Seahawk helicopters on an intercept vector toward Coral Pioneer at their maximum cruise speed of 265 kilometers per hour. The distance from USS Paul Hamilton's position at time of launch to the platform was 41 nautical miles, a transit of approximately 22 minutes. The Seahawks launched at 6:39 a.m. They would arrive at 7:01 a.m., 17 minutes before the IRGC craft reached the platform. They did not arrive in time to prevent the IRGC from boarding, but they arrived in time for something more important. They were overhead, armed, and in communication with the platform's shelter before the IRGC force had completed its initial sweep of the platform's accessible spaces. The IRGC commander aboard the lead fast patrol craft looked up from his boarding operation at 7:09 a.m. and found 2 armed U.S. Navy helicopters orbiting at 500 feet, their M197 rotary cannons pointing directly at his patrol craft. The boarding operation stopped. Third mistake. The personnel had successfully sheltered and the platform's communications were intact. The IRGC's operational plan required the capture of the 41 platform personnel as the primary objective. The secondary objective, the seizure of the platform's communications and intelligence equipment, was predicated on reaching that equipment before it could be secured or destroyed. Neither objective was achieved. The 41 personnel were in the hardened shelter with the hatch secured by the time the IRGC boarding party reached the main deck. The communications and electronics spaces had been hardened, and their most sensitive equipment physically destroyed by the Navy liaison personnel under the emergency protocol in the 20 minutes between the warning and the IRGC arrival. The IRGC boarding party found an empty platform and 2 U.S. Navy helicopters overhead. They had not captured a single person. They had not seized a single piece of intact intelligence equipment. And they were now in a standoff with armed U.S. military aircraft, while their fast patrol craft sat stationary in international waters with their weapons trained on vessels that could destroy them in seconds. Fourth mistake. F/A 18 Super Hornets from USS Dwight D. Eisenhower reached the area 19 minutes after the IRGC boarding party stepped onto the platform. USS Eisenhower had been operating in the Gulf of Oman when the alert reached her at 6:35 a.m. She had immediately turned northwest at flank speed and begun launching aircraft. 4 FA-18E Super Hornets were airborne by 6:48 a.m., carrying AGM-65 Maverick air-to-surface missiles and AGM-84 Harpoon anti-ship missiles. The distance from USS Eisenhower's launch position to Coral Pioneer was 212 miles, a transit of approximately 19 minutes at combat power. The Super Hornets arrived at 7:07 a.m., establishing a combat air patrol overhead and adding 4 strike-capable aircraft to the 2 Seahawks already on station. The IRGC commander had modeled a 4-hour U.S. response timeline. The actual response timeline was 49 minutes from his first vessel reaching the platform to 4 armed U.S. Navy aircraft overhead. Fifth mistake. The Hendagen-class patrol ship that was supposed to provide fire support and extraction capability for the IRGC boarding force had been assessed and targeted before it reached Coral Pioneer. The vessel, larger than the fast patrol craft and carrying heavier weapons that constituted the primary naval threat to USS Paul Hamilton, had been tracked continuously by the MQ-9 from the moment it departed Bandar Abbas. Its classification, its weapons fit, and its role in the operation had been assessed by Fifth Fleet Intelligence within the first 15 minutes of the alert. By the time the Hendagen reached a position 12 miles north of Coral Pioneer, USS Paul Hamilton had computed a full engagement solution on the vessel and was holding it at Harpoon missile range, awaiting the order that she had already requested and that Fifth Fleet was preparing to authorize. Sixth mistake. The IRGC had no extraction plan that accounted for a fully established U.S. air and surface presence. The fast patrol craft that had brought the boarding party to Coral Pioneer were now surrounded. 2 armed Seahawks overhead, 4 Super Hornets at higher altitude. USS Paul Hamilton, 12 miles away, with her 5-inch gun and missile systems oriented on the IRGC formation. The boarding party on the platform was outnumbered by the personnel in the shelter and had no access to them. The Hendagen was being held at standoff by a destroyer whose weapons substantially outranged any system the Iranian vessel carried. The IRGC commander had arrived at Coral Pioneer with a tactical plan. He had no tactical situation that the plan addressed. He was on a steel platform in the middle of the Persian Gulf, surrounded by U.S. military assets, holding no captives and with no path to any outcome except a confrontation that he could not win. At 7:31 a.m., 13 minutes after the boarding, the IRGC commander transmitted a withdrawal request on the maritime emergency frequency. It was not accepted as a simple withdrawal. Fifth Fleet's response, transmitted through the Seahawks radio at 7:33 a.m., was explicit. The IRGC boarding party would lay down their weapons on the platform's main deck. They would return to their fast patrol craft in a sequence directed by the Seahawk crews overhead. The Hendagen-class vessel would reverse course and return to Iranian waters at a speed and on a heading specified by USS Paul Hamilton. Any deviation from these instructions would result in immediate engagement. The IRGC commander had 45 seconds to respond. He responded in 30 seconds. He accepted all conditions. At 7:41 a.m., the last IRGC boarding party member departed Coral Pioneer's main deck and boarded a fast patrol craft. The weapons that had been laid on the deck, 14 AK series rifles, 4 RPG launchers, 2 PKM machine guns, were photographed by the MQ-9 overhead and then secured by the platform's Navy liaison personnel, who emerged from the shelter once the IRGC fast patrol craft had moved 200 meters from the platform. The Hendagen reversed course at 7:44 a.m. and began its transit back toward Iranian waters at the specified speed of 12 knots on the specified heading of 340 degrees. USS Paul Hamilton's fire control director tracked it every mile of that transit. All 41 platform personnel were safe. None had been accessed by the IRGC boarding party. None had sustained any injuries. Now Fifth Fleet answered for the attempted seizure. At 7:47 a.m., 29 minutes after the IRGC initially boarded the platform, USS Paul Hamilton received her strike authorization from Fifth Fleet. The authorization had been prepared and staffed through the Fifth Fleet Judge Advocate General's office in the 47 minutes of warning time before the IRGC reached the platform. A legal finding that the attempted seizure of a U.S.-associated strategic asset and the detention of U.S. military and civilian personnel constituted an armed attack justifying proportionate military response under the laws of armed conflict. The finding was current. The targets were pre-assigned. USS Paul Hamilton fired her first Harpoon missile at 7:48 a.m. The Hendajan-class patrol ship that had been the IRGC Operations Fire Support and Extraction vessel, and that was still 11 miles north of Coral Pioneer on its mandated return heading, was struck by two harpoons in a sequenced engagement separated by 44 seconds. The first harpoon impacted the vessel's engine room. The second impacted amidships. The Hendajan was rendered inoperable and began taking on water. Her crew abandoned the vessel. She sank at 8:04 a.m. The 6 IRGC fast patrol craft, now 3 miles northeast of Coral Pioneer, and increasing their speed in what appeared to be an attempt to accelerate their withdrawal, were engaged by the MH-60R Seahawks at extended range. Each Seahawk carried 4 AGM-114 Hellfire missiles. In 6 minutes of engagement, 4 of the 6 fast patrol craft were rendered inoperable by Hellfire strikes. 2 continued north at maximum speed. They were tracked by the MQ-9 and engaged by Super Hornets using AGM-65 Maverick missiles at ranges that prevented any return engagement. Both were rendered inoperable. 6 IRGC fast patrol craft. All 6 rendered inoperable. 1 Hendajan-class patrol ship, rendered inoperable and removed from the operational area permanently. 0 IRGC vessels escaped to Iranian waters. At 8:01 a.m., 4 B-1B Lancer bombers that had been holding on alert over the Central Gulf, pre-positioned by CENTCOM 48 hours earlier, in response to the elevated threat indicators that had prompted Fifth Fleet's heightened surveillance posture, received their strike tasking. Their targets were the IRGC Naval Base at Bandar Abbas, from which the assault force had sortied, the fast patrol craft maintenance and fuel facility at Qashm Island that supported IRGC Gulf operations, the Maritime Operations Command Center at Bandar Abbas that had directed the assault, and the IRGC Naval Intelligence Facility that had conducted the surveillance of a Coral Pioneer over the preceding weeks. Each B-1B carried 24 GBU-31 JDAM precision guided bombs, 96 JDAMs total across 4 aircraft. The Bandar Abbas IRGC Naval Base received 32 JDAMs beginning at 8:19 a.m., striking the fast patrol craft pier infrastructure, the maintenance facility, fuel storage, and armory. The fuel storage secondary detonation produced a column of black smoke visible from Coral Pioneer 53 miles away. The Qashm Island facility received 24 JDAMs targeting the fast patrol craft maintenance depot, the fuel transfer station, and vessel storage. 14 IRGC fast patrol craft in maintenance at the facility were rendered inoperable on the hardstand. The Bandar Abbas Maritime Operations Command Center received 20 JDAMs. The command building, communications infrastructure, and electronic warfare facility were all rendered inoperable in 62 seconds. The IRGC Naval Intelligence Facility received the final 20 JDAMs. 3 buildings were struck. Computing and storage infrastructure was incapacitated by delayed action penetrating warheads. EA-18G Growlers from USS Eisenhower maintained a jamming architecture over the Bandar Abbas and Qashm areas throughout the B-1B strike, flooding Iranian coastal air defense radar frequencies with broadband interference that degraded any coherent tracking of the inbound strike packages. IRGC air defense operators in the affected areas found their displays dissolving into noise for the duration of the engagement. The full accounting, compiled by 5th Fleet and CENTCOM by 10 a.m. the same morning. 41 platform personnel on Coral Pioneer at time of IRGC boarding attempt. 41 recovered, all unharmed, none accessed by IRGC boarding party. 8 U.S. Navy liaison personnel, all safe. 26 U.S. civilian contractors, all safe. 7 UAE nationals, all safe. IRGC boarding party weapons recovered from platform main deck, intact and secured as evidence. U.S. personnel who sustained fatal outcomes, 0. U.S. military assets rendered inoperable, 0. IRGC assets removed from the operational area or rendered inoperable. 1 Hindajan-class patrol ship, rendered inoperable and sunk. 6 IRGC fast patrol craft, all 6 rendered inoperable, none reached Iranian waters. IRGC personnel from the boarding force and vessel crews who sustained fatal outcomes. 63 IRGC Naval Bandar Abbas Base, fast patrol craft infrastructure comprehensively rendered inoperable. Kishim Island fast patrol craft facility rendered inoperable. 14 vessels on hardstand incapacitated. Bandar Abbas Maritime Operations Command Center rendered inoperable. IRGC Naval Intelligence Facility comprehensively incapacitated. Total IRGC personnel who sustained fatal outcomes across all strike packages, 147. On Coral Pioneer, the shelter hatch was opened at 7:52 a.m. The 41 personnel emerged into the Gulf morning. The same bleached white sky, the same mirror-flat water, the same physical weight of July heat, and found a platform deck clear of IRGC personnel, scattered with the weapons that had been left behind when the boarding party withdrew, and an MQ-9 overhead whose sensor feed had recorded every minute of the preceding 94 minutes in high resolution. The platform's operations supervisor, a 22-year energy industry veteran from Houston, conducted a walkthrough of all accessible spaces and confirmed no structural damage had been sustained. The IRGC boarding party had been on Coral Pioneer's main deck for 13 minutes. They had reached no secure spaces. They had accessed no communications or intelligence equipment. They had made contact with no platform personnel. They had departed having accomplished nothing except the demonstration that their operational plan contained no answer for 44 minutes of warning time and a U.S. military response that was overhead before their extraction vessel had completed its approach. At 9 a.m., Coral Pioneer's commercial operations resumed. The hydrocarbon extraction systems came back online. The communications relay function came back online. The platform did exactly what it had been doing at 7:17 a.m. The minute before the IRGC fast patrol craft emerged from the heat haze, and would continue doing it for as long as US and UAE strategic interests required it to operate in the middle of the Persian Gulf. In Tehran, the IRGC naval commander, who had promised his superiors that 41 captives would be in Iranian custody by noon, was presenting a battle damage assessment that contained none of the outcomes he had promised. 0 captives, 0 intelligence equipment seized, 0 platform infrastructure damaged. The Hindajan-class vessel that was supposed to provide the operation's fire support and extraction capability was at the bottom of the Persian Gulf. 6 fast patrol craft were inoperable or sinking in international waters. The Bandar Abbas base that had launched them was burning. The intelligence facility that had planned the operation was incapacitated, and Coral Pioneer was back to normal operations before the morning was out. The platform had been boarded. It had not been taken. The people inside it had not been touched. The communications equipment they had protected had not been accessed, and the response had arrived in 49 minutes, rather than the 4 hours that the IRGC's operational model had predicted. a discrepancy of 3 hours and 11 minutes that represented the difference between a successful hostage operation and the complete operational failure that had actually occurred. This is what happens when you attempt to seize U.S.-associated strategic infrastructure and capture American personnel in the Persian Gulf. You do not find an isolated platform with no warning and no response. You find a platform that has been warned 44 minutes before your vessels arrive, whose personnel are in a hardened shelter before your boarding party reaches the deck, whose sensitive equipment has been secured and destroyed before you can touch it. You find 2 armed Navy helicopters overhead before you have completed your initial sweep. You find 4 Super Hornets at altitude, adding to the force already surrounding your position. You find a destroyer 12 miles away, holding your fire support vessel at harpoon range. From the moment it crossed the threshold of the operational area, you board a platform and find no one. You lay down your weapons under the direction of helicopter crews overhead. You depart with nothing. And on your return transit toward Iranian waters, the base you launched from is struck before you cross the midpoint of the Gulf. 41 Americans and their colleagues returned to work that morning. As if the 94 minutes between the first radar contact on the IRGC fast patrol craft and the last JDAM impacting the Bandar Abbas facility had been an interruption rather than a crisis. Because for the United States military and the people it protects, properly warned, properly equipped, and properly responded to, that is exactly what it was, an interruption, nothing more. The platform operates, the Gulf is watched, and the next vessel that leaves Bandar Abbas on a heading toward a U.S.-associated asset will find the same architecture waiting, the same MQ-9 overhead, the same Seahawks on 15-minute recall, the same destroyers at patrol stations, the same strike packages already assigned and already authorized. The Gulf does not sleep. Neither does the force that protects it.